how was 2024 even real? Like, seriously, so much happened that a lot of people, myself included, weren't really expecting. Games that we thought we would never see, like, you know, maybe we thought they'd never come back in general, or games we thought would never officially release in English, and we got that stuff. So yeah, I still can't believe that we ended up in a timeline with all of this stuff. It's seriously really cool that any of this even happened. And I'd like to just go over some of the stuff that I played last year. It's a lot of remakes and ports, and, you know, some stuff we did expect at some point, but some of it came as a big surprise. Some of them were completely out of nowhere. And so much of it happened in the same year, and that's the craziest part of it all. First of all, I'd like to start with Trails Through Daybreak. This is a series I got into a few years back. At first, I wasn't super into it, but after playing Cold Steel and more of the games got localized, I started to get more interested in the world and the characters, and, you know, there's plenty of good stuff in there, and some of my favorite games are in this series. And Trails Through Daybreak is the first game in the Calvert arc, which is the latest arc in the series. And right on launch day, it was announced that the sequel will be getting localized and released the following year. The game had already been out in Japan for a while, and, you know, the West had been behind, especially because when they started getting localized, they were much harder to localize, and back when they were working on Trails in the Sky, a lot of issues came up during the translation process. After a while, they changed companies, and over time, I'm assuming they got a lot more people working on these localizations, and the tools that they have these days are definitely a lot better considering the rate we're getting them now. But yeah, it's honestly amazing the pace that they're going at and how fast we're getting them, and the quality of them is pretty damn good, despite what those idiots with those NAS America hate boners say, because they just complain about the stupidest like, no joke. And most of it just boils down to, oh, thing I don't like is included. Yeah, you're just one of those anti-woke idiots. Now shut the up. Now, on the topic of Famicom stuff, Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus got a Switch port, and it gave me an excuse to replay the game, and for the most part, Tokyo Xanadu on Switch runs pretty well. There was the occasional slowdown, and I should also mention Trails Through Daybreak actually runs pretty well on Switch, despite people saying it was not going to be able to handle it. But there were instances of like a slowdown, a bit of delay, nothing unbearable. It's like, you know, you go into a shop, takes a second to process it, there's some popping. Every now and then there's a frame rate drop, especially with like resets. It says one of Reset's field attacks, but nothing unplayable. And Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus, it's much smoother. Trails Through Daybreak, it runs smooth enough. There's just some minor issues with how it runs. EX Plus is a lot better, and there was the occasional frame rate drop, but the main game ran fine. If you tried using the fast forward feature, that would lag. And oddly, I don't think Trails Through Daybreak has the the fast forward feature on Switch. It's not really a deal breaker, but it does make certain parts a bit more tedious. But Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus also had an updated translation, because, like, if you've played the original translation, you'll know it's, like, super memey and stuff. And for some people, that might bother them. Honestly, as long as the core translation is, like, the same, as long as they're getting the same point across, I don't really care if it's, like, memey or jokey. And then plus, certain localizations go for, like, a certain style and feel. like Ace Attorney has like a certain way that it localizes stuff, and I think it works pretty well for that series. But Tokyo Xanadu, like the new translation, for the most part, it's fine, but there are some odd changes. And I'm not gonna lie, some of the stuff in the original Mimir translation, I actually kind of preferred. Rest in peace, ducks, you will be missed. But yeah, that's not all. It also came with a soundtrack. I was totally expecting it to show up in a jewel case, but no, it actually showed up in a standard DVD case. One thing I'd like to bring up would be the price. People were complaining about how much it cost. Like, the Switch listing was showing up for $70, and that's with the soundtrack included. And I have to ask, why were you complaining about the price when it's pretty much normal? Like the base game on Switch without the soundtrack is just $50, and it comes with all of the DLC. Whereas the previous versions of the game were $60 standard price and didn't come with all the DLC. So acting like the Switch price wasn't more fair, it's just dumb. And they're only saying that just because they happened to get it when it was on sale, because like I'm pretty sure most people that played it on Steam got it during like a sale, which is where I got it. But it's such a good game. Like I mean, it's such a good game. Price I thought was fair, so I bought it. One odd thing is there are like a ton of Trails and East references sprinkled throughout, and for some reason they're recolored in the Switch version. I know that Falcom has swapped spit with like multiple different publishers in the West, but like that shouldn't affect like licensing or anything like that, like for whether or not they can be included. Because like, yeah, Axis Games Axis Games handled Tokyo Xanadu, but but Falcom owns the IPs in there, so like just leaving them alone should have been fine. But even then, they're just recolors, so even if it wasn't okay, that'd still be a copyright violation. But whatever, they probably just did it for fun. Who knows? But yeah. Next up is a game that didn't release on Switch. I was totally expecting one, but it didn't happen, unfortunately. It's a bit of a shame, because totally could have worked, if they put in the effort, but there, I guess, weren't originally any plans for a Switch release. Well, I have computers, so I got it on Steam, and my old laptop could not run it. Good thing I had a Steam Deck. And now I have a new laptop, so I can play it on the laptop or my Steam Deck if I feel like it. But I mostly played it on my Steam Deck. So Persona 3 Reload, we were waiting for a remake of Persona 3 for a long time, and we wanted one that combined the best of the different versions of Persona 3, like the best new features from Persona 3 Fez, and the best new features from Persona 3 Portable. Now, there are some elements from Persona 3 Portable in there, and the core game is just based off of the main game in Persona 3 Fez, and there's like all kinds of quality of life improvements from both of those ports, and some completely new ones, including some features that were originally introduced in Persona 5. Like the shift mechanic is basically just another version of the baton pass, and you also have a run button. May not sound like much, but Persona 3 and 4 original, you didn't have a run button. Oh well. And I gotta say, this remake actually made everything a lot more fun. Like, the core dungeon, Tartarus, I didn't really like exploring it that much in the original versions of the game, because every floor felt the same. But in the remake, they made everything feel a bit different. I mean, it doesn't change that it's Tartarus, but it was a lot more fun to explore. And most of the stuff in the main game is stuff I would have expected from the remake. Sadly, there is no female protagonist from Persona 3 Portable, but it seems it was planned, but due to time constraints, they weren't able to make it happen. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Even without her, it's still a very solid remake. There isn't really a whole lot I'd complain about, because, like, I know the graphics look kind of weird. Like, some of the textures and some of the UI make it look kind of like a fan-made game, but it's still a good time, so I can't really complain too much about the main game. But I will say the pricing is very egregious. Like, the main game, $70. This is a remake of a game that originally came out in 2006. What kind of shit are you smoking, Atlas? That's not even the worst part. The DLC, episode Aegis, which was the after story included in Persona 3 Fez, absent in Persona 3 Portable. They originally didn't have it, but because fan demand was so high for it, they included it in the remake, but you had to pay extra for it, and a lot extra. And they released it as part of this, like, season pass thing, so you had to, like, wait a while, and then, like, every few months or so there'd be drops of costumes and music. You know, stuff that's really worth coming back to a game for. And honestly, I didn't really care about the game until, like, episode Aegis came back. Because, like, I wasn't going to launch it for costumes or music. Because, like, that's not substantial content that makes it worth coming back to. Like, if I got busy with other stuff and then came back to the game later and then a new costume dropped, I'd be like, oh, hey, that's kind of cool, but that's not what happened. I'd already finished the game by that point. The main game, that is. And I gotta say, episode Aegis fixes the problem I had with the original version of The Answer, and that being the dungeons were just tedious and not fun to explore. Like, what I didn't like was it was basically just more Tartarus, but with less variety. But because this is running on the Reload engine, it just made it way more enjoyable for me. So I was actually able to get through it. It was still kind of tedious, some of the themes even repeating, but I did manage to make it through. And yeah, I enjoyed it as a whole. I just wish they could be better with their pricing. I mean, we've known Atlas hasn't been that consistent or that great with it. Like, the Etrian Odyssey remasters, for example, they were like $40 each. If you pay for all three in a bundle, you got them for like $80 altogether. I mean, I like Etrian Odyssey, so sure, but these are remasters of the original versions of the games. When the first two games had full remakes on the 3DS, with a lot more content, and their prices were a lot lower. I mean, when they first came out, they were like, what, $50? But they eventually had their prices drop to $20 each, and the first one went on sale for like $10 multiple times, and that's how much I paid for it, $10. Definitely one of the best purchases I've ever made on the 3DS eShop. But yeah, Atlas could definitely do a lot better. It's not their only release from that year. They had a few others, like they re-released Shin Megami Tensei 5. I never really got that into Megami Tensei outside of Persona. I've kind of just like leaned into it, like kind of sunk a bit of time to some of the games, but not a whole of them really grabbed me, because like I played some of the 3DS ones. What was it, like the... because like a bit of the original Soul Hackers got further in the sequel, but still not that far. And then there's like the... I don't know, I forget what it's called, but it's kind of like Fire Emblem, but I didn't get that far in that one either. Another big thing that Atlas did would be Metaphor Refantazio, and when I played it, seems fine. I just didn't get that into it, despite everyone else saying it's amazing. Like, there's a good game there, but I just don't really feel that strong of an attachment to it. But there are more games that were surprising outside of Atlas and Falcom. This next one came completely out of nowhere. And that would be Another Code Recollection. This had been on my radar for a while because it was made by the studio that did the Kyle Hyde games, Hotel Dusk and Last Window, games that I have covered on my channel in the past. And they're both some of my favorite Nintendo DS games, and I'm hoping they can get re-releases in some form at some point. Wasn't expecting Ashley to get her games re-released in any form, but it happened. Like, in the middle of a Nintendo Direct, I just see this stuff for Another Code. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can finally give this a shot. Like, I was planning to pick up the original games at some point, like the DS version of the original Another Code, and then the Wii version I'd either import or just emulate it or something, I don't know. But this just made it much easier for me. I could just get the remake, which contains 2 games in one, so it's just basically a retelling of both of those games. There are some differences with the plot. Like, I hear the second game, the ending's a lot different from the original. I never played the original, so I couldn't really say. I hear the puzzles in the Switch version are easier. I don't really mind that. I still had a pretty good time with it. One thing that I find odd is how you can only play both games in order. Now, for a first playthrough, that's fine, but, like, when you complete the game, there's no option to just choose one game over the other. It's not a deal breaker, because, like, both of the plots are kind of connected and have stuff to do with each other. It just seems a bit weird that you don't get that option at all. But I can't really complain. I would love to see Ashley get another game, or Kyle Hyde to get remakes in the same style. I just think that would be very cool. Apollo Justice Ace Attorney Trilogy is something that a lot of Ace Attorney fans knew would happen at some point. We just didn't know when. And, you know, I got excited when it happened. It came out early 2024. And I gotta say, these are some damn good versions of these games. Like, they might be the most divisive games in the series, but in this form, like, oh my gosh, I had so much fun with all 3. Like, I love Ace Attorney 4, despite its mixed reception. Because, like, people have things they like and don't like. Sure, it doesn't have the strongest cases in the series, but some of the points that people complain about are kind of weird. I'd love to do a video where I go into more detail on what I think about Polo Justice at some point, but I just don't know when that'll be. Dual Destinies is one of my least favorites, but it's still a good collection of cases, in my opinion. Pretty much any Ace Attorney game I have a good time with, regardless of what I think of it overall. And Spirit of Justice is a pretty damn good one, despite how weird it is. But those are all my opinions. And the collection came with, like, all this extra stuff. Like, there's artwork, a music player, animation studio, which is really cool. And you can even customize the menus, set the backgrounds to what you want, or change the music. You're limited to what's in the game, of course, or in the compilation, but still, pretty cool to give you the option. Apollo Justice Trilogy isn't the most surprising compilation of the year. Ace Attorney Investigations Collection was far more surprising. This got announced in another Nintendo Direct much later, and Ace Attorney fans all over the world lost their damn minds. So, in Ace Attorney Investigations Collection, the second Ace Attorney Investigations game is well known for never releasing outside of Japan before 2024. So when this came out, that meant we were getting Ace Attorney Investigations 2 in English officially for the first time. I'm familiar with the fan translation. I played it years ago, and I've gone through it like a few times, and the fans did a pretty good job making it feel like an official localization. How could Capcom approach this? Well, they did it by making it one of the most unhinged translations of all time. And I love it for that. There are a few other weird changes with it. Like, the original game has some of the lines changed. I'm not really sure why, but it's not really a big deal. Extra features, it's a bit lighter compared to Apollo Justice Trilogy, like no customizable menus, but the UI still looks nice, and you know, you got different key art that shows up throughout your playthroughs. So that's nice. You still got the music player. You don't have an animation studio, but you can view like sprites from the game, and yeah. Still a solid collection. Good way to play these games. Honestly, it's really crazy we got 2 Ace Attorney compilations in the same year. But related to Ace Attorney, Danganronpa. Well, we didn't get a new Danganronpa game, but we got... Well, in 2023, we got a spiritual successor to Danganronpa, and then in 2024, that spiritual successor got a port and released on PC, Xbox, and PS5, so it was no longer a Switch exclusive. I have not played that version of the game yet, but I'll get to it eventually. Much like I'll eventually get to that other game they're claiming is a spiritual successor to Danganronpa, which is pretty much Danganronpa Fire Emblem. But going to another mystery adventure text game, or visual novels, I will not back down from this. I will die on this hill. These games are visual novels. Emio the Smiling Man is the latest game in the Famicom Detective Club series, and what's surprising about it? More than one thing, honestly. For one, it's surprising that it even exists at all, because it's like the first new game in the series in like a few decades. And you know, like a few years back, like the remakes of the first 2 came as a surprise. I just remember them being announced. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I didn't check them out until later. But what's interesting about this one is how it was announced. Nintendo just released a very cryptic teaser and didn't tell anybody what it was. It was like a week later they revealed it was a new Famicom Detective Club game, and people were kind of disappointed that it wasn't like some kind of new IP. And looking back at it, most people realized it was probably for the best they announced it this way, because if they announced it in a Nintendo Direct or something, more people would have glossed over it, and it really worked in the game's favor, actually, because like a lot of people actually checked this out, and multiple people are saying it's one of the best experiences they've had on the Switch. And I gotta say, I don't entirely share that sentiment, but it is definitely worth checking out if you're into this kind of game. Not only is it being a late entry in its series very surprising, but the M rating. So Nintendo has done M-rated games in the past, but usually they're just a publisher. I think like one of their biggest ones is Bayonetta, but that one's still technically owned by Sega, and they really only publish it with Platinum Games developing it. I think it's Platinum Games. But Famicom Detective Club, Emio the Smiling Man, this one actually had Nintendo staff involved. It wasn't entirely first party because, like, you know, Studio Mages worked on it, but the fact that actual Nintendo staff worked on this one was interesting. And the kind of content in the game, the fact that Nintendo released a game like this is pretty crazy. Like, it's not entirely out of the question for Nintendo games to have controversial content. I mean, Fire Emblem has incest. Xenoblade has polygamy. But there is some disturbing content in Emio the Smiling Man that most people wouldn't expect from a Nintendo game. And I certainly wasn't expecting it. Now, the main game, like, it totally would have passed with a T rating, but you're, like, given all these crumbs of the full story, and then you just get the rest of the details just dropped on you at the end, and I gotta say, it was a lot to take in. Like, I was in shock that this was a Nintendo game by the time I was finished. Like, I really couldn't believe the kind of content in here. I would go into more detail, but that would be spoiling things. But yeah, if you're interested in this kind of game, you don't need much context from the previous ones. There's a little bit of continuity, and if you don't play the previous ones, you might not appreciate some of the running gags, which, I actually do like a couple of the running gags in the series. Like, yeah. So if you're interested, I highly recommend checking this out just to see what kind of content's in it. It's definitely worth playing at least once. Now, moving on from mystery games, we got Sonic Cross Shadow Generations, making the first time Sonic Generations has ever released on a Nintendo platform. I played the original Sonic Generations on PC a while back, and I think it's a bit overhyped. Like, it's a good Sonic game, no doubt, but I'm not really feeling it as much as everyone else was. Like, sure, the stages, they're designed well enough, but, like, there's weird padding with the challenge stages that you're forced to go through. Some of the boss fights are kind of annoying, but then again, I've never been a big fan of boss fights. Overall, I do think Sonic Generations is a good Sonic game. I just don't think it's an amazing Sonic game. I have not played Shadow Generations, which comes in this new package, but I hear it's really good. Now, back to complete surprises that came out of nowhere. This one was announced in the Nintendo Direct that announced another code, Recollection, and that was Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door getting a remake. I remember I woke up early just to watch the Nintendo Direct, because they do a lot of them in the morning. I work night shifts at Walmart, so you know how fun getting up early for this is for me. But I get on my phone, like I'm watching it, and then they said, one more announcement. And the second the trailer started, I knew exactly what it was. And that made it hard for me to go back to sleep. But yeah, I got real excited when I saw they were remaking The Thousand Year Door. Like, I think I quickly shot a message to my brother, like, hey, they're remaking Thousand Year Door. It's gonna come on Switch. And, I played it, and it's a fantastic remake. Sure, there are some weird little issues, like it's harder to judge your jumps, frame rate's lower. It hasn't really been too much of an issue, but it is noticeable at very specific times. And then there's like no reading previous text, no fast forwarding text. Weird little things are missing. But there are a ton of small changes that make me prefer this version of the game. And there's even a bit of new content. Not a crazy amount, but it's serviceable. There's like a couple new boss fights. Soundtrack was entirely remade. You can unlock artwork and songs from the soundtrack, which makes it much easier to keep track of how much of a game's completed. So if you're a completionist, you'll know if you've completely gotten all the collectibles in an area. And honestly, this was the very first time I complete the Thousand Year Door 100%. I never did that on the GameCube version, but I was having such a blast with the Switch remake that I managed to do everything. And yeah, I would love to see more remakes of Nintendo's best games, like hell, even more Paper Mario games. Mario & Luigi Brothership was another one that came out of nowhere, and it opened a Nintendo Direct. And I played a bit of it, and what I played is okay. The craziest part of this one is the fact that the series even came back, because after Alpha Dream went bankrupt, making one of the most pointless remakes ever, we thought we weren't going to get anything else in the series. But we got a new game, and opinions have been a bit all over the place. Some people think it's the worst Switch game of all time, or at least Nintendo's worst Switch game. And some people think it's amazing, some people think it's okay. I'm kind of in the group that thinks it's okay. But I haven't played that much of it, so we'll see what my opinion ends up like later on. Like, there are some weird little things that I don't like about it, like how you travel to different areas. It just seems slower and more tedious than it needs to be, but overall the main gameplay is fine. But the combat totally messes with your muscle memory if you've played previous Mario and Luigi games, because, you know, Luigi has always been the B button, Mario A, but in this version, in this game, you have to use the menu with A for both, and then switch to B if you're using Luigi, but, like, you have to use A on the menu first, and then hit B. But because of how the menu's set up, you're more likely to hit the wrong button. Messed me up multiple times, but it doesn't completely ruin the game, it's just a little annoying. In that same Nintendo Direct, Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, I will admit I'm not a huge Zelda fan. Like, I don't hate the games or anything. I just never get fully into them because, like, I get lost and don't know what to do, and I don't know, I just end up getting bored at that point. But, like, when I know what I'm doing, and, like, I have a good time. Like, honestly, Link to the Past was alright about that, so I got stuck way less than I did in Link's Awakening. But yeah, I saw this Zelda game where you actually play a Zelda. I'm like, oh cool, I might check that out. Then I bought it and put it on my shelf, and that's all I did. The next game I'm going to talk about is a bit of a mixed bag. I have gotten some enjoyment out of it, but there are things I don't like about it either. And some fans of the series just completely skipped on it, or they tried it and just dropped it. Of course, I'm talking about Atelier, Resleriana, Forgotten Alchemy, and the Polar Knight Liberator. I gotta specify with a subtitle because there's another Atelier Resleriana coming out in the future. Anyways, Atelier Resleriana, the mobile game, the Atelier Gacha that came out in 2024, it's a gacha game, so I'm not really sure what to say about it that I haven't really said about it already. Gameplay is a lot different from regular Atelier. There's still synthesis, but it's pretty simplified. Combat's pretty simplified. The exploration is just like this really linear thing. It just doesn't have the full fun exploration of a normal Atelier game. Like, I'm still kind of enjoying the plot and stuff in it, but progressing through it just becomes harder as you get further because of the gacha mechanics. And sometimes I just wish it could have been a normal game. At the very least, I wish it could have been something like a Genshin Impact clone or, you know, something like that. Just, if the game ran similarly to something like Genshin Impact or Honkai Star Rail, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have as many people complaining about it. Yeah, sure, people would still be disappointed about the gacha elements, but at least then it would be more in line with a normal Atelier game. Not really much we can do. I'm just confused that it's mainline, because, like, it really should be a spin-off, but oh well, at least Atelier doesn't end with a weird mixed mobile game. Because we ended up getting the announcements for Atelier Yumiya and another Atelier Resleriana game, so yeah, at least the series isn't actually dead. And to finish things off, I'd like to talk about some visual novels. First one I'd like to talk about is Kanon. So this is one I've watched one of the anime adaptations for, and I loved it. I eventually did a fan translation of the visual novel back in 2018, which made me appreciate this specific anime adaptation even more, because it covered so much of this visual novel. And in 2024, we got a port, and yeah, I've played a bit of it. It's okay, it runs alright. The UI looks okay. I can't really complain. I was just a bit surprised there was controller support. Haven't really done much of it, but I'll probably get more of it done eventually. Because the studio that makes these visual novels, Key, they want to get more of their stuff out there, and they definitely seem serious about it, because, like, I've noticed some more of their stuff going up. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to more of their stuff dropping on Western platforms. The very last visual novel I would like to talk about is Katawa Shoujo. This is one I've talked about years ago, and it was one that I really enjoyed when I was really into playing free visual novels, because I was a high school student with no money. It got a Steam port all these years later. It's like, what, 12 years later it got a Steam port? I haven't really played it, but oh well, it's cool that it's on Steam now. But yeah, a lot of interesting stuff happened in 2024. It's hard to believe that it's been a real year. That or I might just be hallucinating.